All right. I apologize. We are live now, finally. We had a few technical difficulties getting this broadcast going, but I'm on with Jay Campbell, TRT Revolution. He's a guy that's well versed on optimizing male hormones, and the reason why I brought him on today is I've become very interested in this space the last couple of years. At first, I guess came on my radar a few years ago when I was meeting guys in their 40s that were super high energy, and then they started talking about being on testosterone replacement therapy. So today's live broadcast will run for roughly about 1 hour. We're about 10 minutes late getting into this one. So we're going to run to about 1 o'clock, and then we're going to be bringing kind of the how-to details to Patreons only, because we're going to be getting into some non-politically correct stuff. So I want to put that behind that area just so we don't have any problems publicly live with YouTube. So welcome, Jay. How you doing, brother?
I'm awesome, Richard. I truly appreciate you having me on today. I'm privileged to be here and excited to engage and inform.
Awesome. As I'm just going to set up the pop-out chat so we can take questions towards the end. Can you give everybody kind of like an elevator pitch on who you are and what brought you to this?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Written 3 best-selling books on Amazon. The original book was the Definitive TRT Manual, How to Optimize Your Testosterone for Lifelong Health and Happiness. That dropped in November of 2015. It has subsequently gone on to become the #1 selling book on testosterone replacement therapy, which I don't use anymore as far as the terminology. We'll get to that in a second. Of all time, it's got like close to 500 5-star reviews on Amazon. And then, from that, it's opened me up into a completely different world. I work with doctors. I network with like all kinds of people in the optimization space. In the last 6.5, 7 months, I've written 2 other books, also both bestsellers on Amazon, The Metabolic Blowtorch Diet, and then my most recent, which is the TOT, Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible. And that book is literally the Bible because it's close to 600 pages, has over 650 scientific research citations, and 5 of the world's top hormone optimization specialist doctors in the world who have, contributed to it. So it's just an epic, high-level book. Honestly, nothing has ever been written like it by the medical community. It's just too difficult for them to collate and come together. So that's kind of me. I'm excited to be here today. And obviously this is my mission, to teach men how to optimize their hormones.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. So again, just to recap, we were unlisted for a few minutes there while you were chatting. So what I did is I got it live now. Again, Jay Campbell, TRT Revolution, wrote a couple books, very well versed in the space. I want to talk about this today because I want to help guys optimize testosterone, their hormones, just become the better version of themselves. And that's really what my channel has always been about. So I want to do a little bit of a background as far as how this came on my radar screen. I'm doing 2 things at the same time here. I'm not very good with technical stuff.
No, I get it, man. I'm like you all the time.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
We'll get to it though. I mean, one of the cool things about it is you learn as you go, and your audience kind of gets that. So that's totally fun.
For sure.
All right. Let's see if we can pop this out. Hey, how you doing, Dan Rock? Guys, save your questions for towards the end. We're going to try to run to about 1 o'clock, so we're going to run for about 45 minutes. This will be more of an overview on TRT and male hormones and optimizing those. So just hang on to the questions towards the end, and we'll make sure that we leave some space for them there. So this first came on my radar screen. This is probably a book that you'll recognize, right?
Oh, of course.
So I've been picking up heavy stuff and putting it down for a long time. First started for me in an aerobics and weight training class in my teens. And I started to see very, very quickly, if you do the work and you pick up heavy stuff and put it down, your body will grow. I was never able to change anything about my skin, and I've always had this issue. I guess, the self-awareness from my 3rd-degree burns. And I always realized after about 16 to 18 or so, that you could change what was under your skin, which would, of course, change your outlook on life, your outlook on life, your mood, and everything like that. So I picked this up. This is a 20-year-old book. Yeah. I'm really well versed on every kind of anabolic that they've ever put out on the market. I mean, you want to talk about Primobolan, Winstrol, Test-Sip, Decadurabolin. I know what all the benefits
are. Coursing through my veins right now.
I know what all this stuff is, but I've never touched it. I've never injected it. I did one time in Mexico pick up a syringe of Decadurabolin in my 30s.
And you were thinking about it.
And I was thinking about it. And when I saw the size of the needle, man, it was like a harpoon. I'm like, screw this. But I knew that Decadurabolin was good at drawing water into your joints. So it helped to relieve joint pain. And at that time, I started to have bad knees from lifting way too much weight. So
Right.
that's kind of a bit of a background. I didn't know what TRT was until about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, when I started, talking to friends of mine that were in their mid to late 40s, and they started, coming off with really high energy, getting shit done in their life, world class, talking about great sex and all kinds of things. You're like, well, what's the secret? And then they start mentioning things like, well, what's TRT? And you kind of get into that. And that stands for testosterone replacement therapy. So to answer the burning question that's popped up in my videos quite a few times over the last few years is, am I on TRT? I just started 1 week ago. And we're going to talk more about those details in the private broadcast for patrons. Does it work? Absolutely. My experience with it has been amazing so far. Jay, what brought you to it? I want to hear about your background and origin story.
Yeah, so no problem. So my origin story. So I'm an ex college basketball player. I had a cup of coffee, played internationally for like less than a year when I got out professionally. So, and then, in my early 20s was always an athlete, gravitated towards lifting weights. Like you said, picking up heavy things. I like that. Right when I stopped playing basketball hardcore, I mean, I was always training because I had to stay in shape, but when I was done playing basketball, I was literally I'm 6'1" and a half, 6'2" in basketball shoes, 6'1" and a half. And I weighed about 188 to 190 pounds. And I stayed like that. And I definitely took care of myself all the way through my 20s. When I was 29 years old, I got kicked in the testicles playing a very competitive men's basketball league in Los Angeles. And a month later, I started going through the typical subclinical blues and had no idea what was going on with me. I went to a doctor. It was pure luck, literally random chance. Went to a PPO quack, and the guy referred me to an endocrinologist because he said, you at your age right now, this shouldn't be right. I want you to get some blood work done. So anyway, the guy that he referred me to happened to be a Harvard-educated endocrinologist. And he was like, he took tests, obviously, and he was like, you got 250 testosterone. I want to put you on testosterone injection. So my wife at the time is long gone. And I discussed it, and we were like, well, that's kind of weird. I was a smart guy because my background in college was in molecular bio. I had a minor in molecular bio. So, I knew about this kind of stuff, but I was still very hesitant at 29 years old to do it. Long story short, I went on it, and literally within 6 weeks, I completely was a changed person. I felt more energy. I felt like I was 18 again. And then being the nerd that I was, I started really reading about all this stuff. And then I stayed with that doctor for like 3 years. He was in South Orange County, or he moved to South Orange County, got too far away, started working with other doctors, never left, always stayed on a therapeutic dose of testosterone. And obviously at this point, 5-6 years later now, I started reading up on it. I'm 35 now. And I just became, like I always am about everything I do, just a geek, and extremely knowledgeable, read up, kept reading. I found Nelson Virgil's book at the time, which was called Built to Survive, which was really the only book in the United States at this time. It was probably like, I'm trying to remember, it was 1997 or 1998 was when his book came out. But when I read it, it was like 2002, that talked about using testosterone in the purposes of for therapeutic reasons to stay healthy and all that stuff. And then I just, like I said, I started going on Medline and PubMed and just scouring the research. And to get to where I am here today, I just became really, really knowledgeable. A lot of my friends, was a successful sales guy in Los Angeles, a lot of high-level friends that I met, said, you need to put a book out. And I was really, really good friends with Mike Cernovich. We still are, but we don't talk as much anymore. And he kind of convinced me. He's like, dude, you got to write a book on this. And when I first tried to put the book out, which was in 2000, early to middle part of 2014, I sent the book, when it was done, to Rick Collins. And Rick Collins is obviously a famous attorney, who kind of handles sports, anabolics, everything, WWE. He's all involved in that. And he read the book and he was like, wow, this is incredible. Because I had asked him for a legal review, and he said, Jay, there's no one can grant anyone a legal review, because if somebody gets a bug up their ass as a lay person, which you're a non-medical professional writing a book about this, then, it could lead to trouble. So, that's all I can tell you. So that shelved the book. But thankfully, I'd also sent a manuscript of it to Nelson Virgil, who happened to be at the time in his native Venezuela. He didn't read it for like 2 months. So the book was still shelved. And all of a sudden one night I got an email from him, and he said, who the hell are you? He read the book. He's like, we need to talk. Long story short, he was like, you have to put this book out to men. Because I was obviously fearful at the time. I didn't want to put the book out. And he said, no, you have to put this book out. It's gold, blah, blah, blah. So that was, mid to the end of 2014. And then I edited it further. He helped me. He kind of guides me and mentored me. And then the book came out in 2015. And That's where we are here today. So I was on testosterone, as I tell everybody. I've been on testosterone since literally 1 month before I turned 30, and I'm 47 now. So I've been on it literally close to 18 years.
Right. So there's been guys that have had accidents where they need it as a supplementation. Then there's guys like me that haven't, and you use it to basically optimize your life.
100%.
Can you talk about the differences there?
Yeah, sure. So testosterone deficiency, there's a lot of different clinical terms for it nowadays. They also call it partial androgen deficiency. They also call it type 2 hypogonadism. Is literally, I say now technically it's ubiquitous. I mean, obviously I always default to the book, but it's, very clearly and elucidatedly explained in the book. But most men today living in large coastal population centers are struggling to maintain optimal testosterone levels. I literally did a podcast yesterday with a very famous physician here in Beverly Hills, Dr. Uzi Reese. He's 74 years old. He's literally kind of the father of hormone therapy before anybody was even doing any of it. And he was literally doing testosterone injections to people in 1981. Okay. And he told me that today men walking around on the street are literally, and I have some of this, there's not a lot of data to correlate to this, but this is in his clinical practice. He said that men walking around the street today are literally 1/5 the where they were when they were his age, because he's 74. So he's basically saying that guys walking around in the 40s and 50s, the World War II generation, were literally average 900 to 1,000 total testosterone levels. Guys walking around on the street today at all ages. This is not just an age, situation where guys over 40 and 50 need this. This is younger too. He said are 1/4 to 1/5 of that. So he's saying that it's between 160 and 300 is the average guy walking around on the street. And again, that's total testosterone levels, nanogram per deciliter. So this is an epidemic, as you know, Richard. It's definitely unrecognized by the medical community. The medical community is years behind, probably 20, 25 years behind, because there's no standard patient of care practice administration, at a doctor level access across the United States. And it's worse, by the way, internationally, where most doctors literally don't even treat for this. So you've got hundreds of millions of men in the world right now who don't even have answers. They can't even go to a physician and get scripted testosterone when that is literally the lifeblood, molecule that's the origin and source of all of their issues, their health issues.
So we get doctors that will prescribe antidepressants instead of testosterone for guys in their 40s. Guys will show up not feeling good, feeling tired, not waking up with morning wood, can't get out of the bedroom, can't focus, have brain fog. And then they're like, oh, you're depressed. Let me give you this. Talk about the difference between how antidepressants affect guys around this age versus what testosterone does.
Yeah, so it's a great question. That is the number one therapy for men who have testosterone deficiency. Unfortunately, that's how sad our system is.
Meaning like it's misdiagnosed, right?
It's completely misdiagnosed. When a man presents today, and again, regardless of age, with depression, listlessness, lethargy, indecisiveness, obviously a lack of energy. Most men, the presenting symptom is that they say, doc, at 1:30, 2 o'clock every day, I literally am done. I want to go home and take a nap. I'm toast. Those are the symptoms, classic symptoms of testosterone deficiency. And most men report depression. They report brain fog. And then the next thing becomes sexual dysfunction. So what the physician does, instead of treating the actual root cause, which is clearly a testosterone deficiency, they will order, an SSRI, which is like Restoro or Wellbutrin or one of those things, for them. And of course, most guys, they look up at the doctor and he's like the lab coat god, and they're not going to question it. And then after that, the doc says, oh, and by the way, I can also write you a script for this. And, it's usually a sexual dysfunction medication like Viagra, Levitra, Cialis, or something like that. So ultimately, men go in and they get scripted for SSRIs and then sexual dysfunction drugs, never even treat the root cause of the symptoms. And as you know, from a lot of probably people that follow you, most men get worse.
Now, doctors are pretty reluctant to prescribe this sort of stuff. Like I remember when I was in my 20s and I went into my family doctor, I was like, hey, doc, I got this book. I'm 25, I'm like, charged to get big and strong because that's what I wanted at the time. Looking back on it, I didn't need it. And then the doctor at the time said, no, I'm not going to prescribe this. Fine, cool. Definitely the right decision. But for guys that are around, this age, like, I know, like, one of the videos that I watched early on was a Joe Rogan video, and he's like, yeah, I've been on TRT, I've been on it since I was 39. Like, why wouldn't you want to do this? Why wouldn't you want to live like an optimal life for the rest of your life, even if it shaves off like 1 to 5 years of your life? Why not live like a legend for the rest of your life than like a tired piece of shit sort of thing, right?
Right.
And I kind of get that, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that, for me, a lot of the symptoms that I started to feel, like, I've always been a pretty strong guy. Like, I've only started TRT about a week ago. My body mass composition hasn't changed anything whatsoever. I'm not on a high dosage. I'm on a low dose. And I'll be talking about that more in the Patreon broadcast that we do after that, and all those other details. But when you start to feel symptoms like, having trouble sleeping. One of the things that I notice a lot of is usually by about 6:30, I'd have a day with my daughter. She's 8. And by 6:30, be like, eat. And then you kind of chill on the couch. You throw on something on Netflix to watch, to kind of like, wind down the evening. And I'll pass out and I'll sleep. And it was like, what the hell's going on? Right. And then the other thing that I started to notice was going to the gym, I wouldn't be able to pick up anything heavy anymore. It got to the point where I was only able to squat like 25s, and I've had bad knees. So when I went in there, like, one of the things that I was doing in the clinic was like, all right, I've read this book. I know that Decadurabolin will bring, water into your joints and relieve joint pain and strengthen them and repair that muscle. So that's what I asked for. And he's like, no, I don't prescribe this. I do test SIP because it's bioidentical to your own body's testosterone. It's not distinguished. It works better. Fine. Okay, we'll check that out. I was well versed on where I was at, how my strength had been going down, how my mood had changed, how I had problems sleeping. There's a whole bunch of things that tie into that, and not many doctors know what to do or if they want to prescribe it. I was reading in an article that there's a move more towards gels and pellets, and there's a lot of insurance kickbacks for those sorts of things. What's your experience been with those sort of, doctors not prescribing or being reluctant to prescribe that sort of therapy?
Yeah, it's a good question. Unfortunately, I always default to saying that because I work with so many amazing doctors. Like, next week, I'll be at the AMMG conference in Orlando. It's literally the creme de la creme of the best physicians in the world that practice optimization. I don't even like caulking it, just so the listeners know who don't know me. We don't use the acronym TRT anymore. It's a worthless acronym. It's out of, it offers nothing. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. Somebody just rang our doorbell. But the reality is, if you're doing this right, you work with a physician, you should be looking to optimize, not replace, because we know society-wide right now, there's an issue where men are literally dealing with a decline. It's clearly natural through life, but now it's happening at such an early age because of the environmental siege that we're talking that is ongoing everywhere, again, in large coastal population centers. So you want to focus on optimization therapy. But in answer to your question, there's a lot of different delivery systems. Okay, we break every single delivery system down in the book. In my opinion, and I've used them all. I have not used pellets because that's medieval nonsense. But the only two that are actually realistic for a man to use, because remember, you got to do this forever, is injections and gels. And gels, and I don't, each person has to choose like what is optimal for them. Some men will not use a needle. They're just phobic of needles. And so they're always going to have an issue. So for those guys, a gel is the other answer. The issue for me with gels is a lot of preparation before time has to happen. You can't hug a loved one, your daughter, your wife. You can't even hug your animals because it'll rub off on your animals. So it's just a lot of application and practice that needs to go into working, with gels or transdermals. Everything else, pellets, buccals, patches. Now they even have dermal, they have a nasal spray. It's called Natesto. Totally inefficient. Again, all highly, broken down in the book. We analyze like all the pros and cons and also, why you shouldn't do what you do. But I mean, most doctors are going to prescribe what they make money on. They don't make money on injections. Okay. They rarely make money on gels. If they prescribe Androgel, which is a worthless, absolutely, totally worthless, application system, which is the one that they make the most money on because obviously the pharmaceutical companies pitch it, then they'll prescribe that too, but that's also completely inefficient. So at the end of the day, the only two delivery systems, in my opinion, that are worth using from a lifelong standpoint are gels that are dosed correctly, which is at 20%, or injections. And to me, an injection is the most convenient, simplistic, Anybody can do it. It takes less than 10, 15 seconds. You can do a couple, 2, 3 times a week or whatever, and it doesn't affect your life.
Cool. And we'll talk more about that in the live broadcast with the patrons, because I know they've got some questions in there too. Yeah. So we talked about the doctors and prescribe. So what should guys look like look for when it comes to blood work? Because I've always I sent you my blood work and I keep it all together in this file. Yep. I know that we have a different standardized system in Canada, versus the US, the way that they measure it and, where you should be on that scale. So we'll deal with that separately in the Patreon broadcast. But what should guys be looking for in their blood work? And do they need to get blood work to decide whether or not they've got low T or how they might want to optimize their hormones? Because in these blood work results, like the first one that I did, they must have drawn, 12 to 15 vials. And I've got 4 pages here on every kind of like general chemistry, lipids, triglycerides, HDL, like everything. What's your view on blood work? And there's also those spit tests too. Like they have the ones where you spit in the vial and they try to test your testosterone there. So, spit test versus blood work. And what's your view on, do you need that to optimize your hormones?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you said that. Saliva tests are absolutely fucking worthless. Okay. They're completely invalid. Anybody who does a saliva test to measure their testosterone is retarded. Okay. If you're working with a physician that is measuring your testosterone through saliva, you're an idiot and you need to fire your doctor because he has no idea what they're doing. And there are a lot of physicians that are using saliva tests, but they're completely worthless. We have literally the subsection of a chapter in the book that shows the type of tests that need to be done. There's really only one test today that's standardized, and it's called liquid chromatography. We refer to it as liquid C, kind of in the industry and amongst the optimization crews that I kind of hang in. But you have to get your blood work done. Okay. You have to understand an internal diagnostic. You talked about your labs. I literally have my labs for 20 years in a black file folder right here. And I've been checking my blood work twice a year for the last 20 years, even before I was ever even on testosterone. I've always known that because of kind of my background. But every man today, in my opinion, at the age of 25 should get their blood work done at least once a year, because that's the only true standardized way to understand what's going on in your body from a health standpoint. Okay. A doctor office visit with open up, checking your back and your breathing. That's a bunch of nonsense. That's old school. You got to have an internal diagnostic. Your blood work is the only way to do it. We have cheat sheets in the book. We have a whole chapter on understanding how to read your blood work. I mean, it is esoteric when you first read it, when you first look at it. But once you understand like what biomarkers to pay attention to, it becomes very, very simple. But yes, you've got to get your blood work done. But to get testosterone legally, depending on what country you're in, and also from a physician that knows what they're doing, you have to present with symptoms. So it's always a clinical diagnosis before it is with blood work, but nobody is going to write you a script for testosterone without having blood work that shows that you have a deficiency. But here's where it gets confusing. Okay. You can have testosterone levels in a quote unquote normal range, but that doesn't define whether or not you're actually deficient because of your age. So unfortunately, there's no like universal mean that denotes testosterone levels based on age. So if you're an older guy, okay, and you used to be having in your peak years, you were at 750, and now you're at like 150, then you're probably deficient. But if you were a guy who's 40 and you've been functioning with 450 your whole life, and now you're at like 290 or 300, and you don't have any of the testosterone symptoms, then you might not even be deficient. So it's very, very confusing, and that's why it requires an actual expert clinician who has an experiential based practice of prescribing hormones to men and then also managing them, over life, because this isn't something where guys go on and off. So it can kind of get confusing, but you definitely have to understand specific biomarkers. You should always understand your lipid levels. You should understand your hepatic function, which is your liver level. Your liver enzymes. You should obviously understand your hemoglobin and your A1C, which is your glucose tolerance, and your understanding of how your body handles insulin, your body's natural insulin sensitivity. And then there's a couple other things. Again, it's all broken down in the book, but these are things that men should absolutely learn. Again, if your goal is lifelong health and living longer and stronger.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've been paying attention to this for quite a few years now. I've got records that go back. I can even see patterns in my records, I was talking. I don't know if it was to my patrons on a live broadcast or a regular one, but one of the things that I noticed was at a series of blood markers when I had it drawn at a time when I was dealing with this shitty relationship and there was a ton of stress in it, my cortisol level was through the roof.
Oh yeah.
And then I was kidding around. I'm like, it turns out that that the red pill is good for your blood work too and your testosterone, because my cortisol levels dropped and my testosterone levels went up a couple points too, right? So this stuff matters. I mean, if you want to optimize your life and, obviously become the better version of yourself that we're all trying to be and do here. My regular audience, of course, that's watching this knows exactly what I'm talking about. This shit matters. And it's not cheap. I don't know what it costs in the States, Jay, but here, like for me to get the full blood markers, and part of it's covered by the government because we've got some healthcare coverage for stuff like this, it's about $193. What does it cost in the US to get your full blood work done?
It's around the same. I mean, so here's the thing. Like if you're working with the right physician, you're doing this correctly, it's all going to be factored in. They're going to, depending on your age, they're going to pull your labs 2 or 3 times a year. When you start, it's a good question, but when you start testosterone, and this is just my personal recommendation after doing this a long time, I believe you should do 3 labs in your first year. And you have to have a baseline, clearly, which is, the labs that you take before you start so that you have something going on. But here's where most doctors fuck up, okay? Most doctors prescribing hormones will then take your labs, and then let's say you have a deficiency based on blood work and symptoms, and then they immediately start you and hammer you on like some cookie cutter templatized version of TOT, right? A testosterone, whatever the delivery system is, an AI, which is an aromatase inhibitor medication, which is supposed to suppress estrogen. But if you don't have an estrogen issue, why the fuck are you taking that? And then they also will throw you down usually HCG. So they kind of like shotgun you with like 3 or 4 different drugs at the very beginning of therapy because that's their cookie cutter templatized version. And it's stupid because you, as a guy who just started testosterone, you need to establish a baseline mean so that we can see what that drug, that chemical agent in your body is going to do over the next 20, 30, 40, and 50 days. So when they put all these different exogenous drugs into your body, you have no idea what's doing what. So like 40 days down the road, if you didn't have an issue with estrogen, you didn't need to take that AI. You didn't need to take a drug that suppresses your estrogen. So now you're just throwing guys like in this like perpetual, blue moon loop where they have absolutely no idea what's doing what. And I see this with so many guys. I mean, I have literally thousands of men that come to me, around the world and say, hey, here's what my doc got me on and here's where I'm at. What can I do? And I'm like, dude, you got to get unfucked. You got to first pull this back, start here, fire your doctor first. I mean, there's so many issues that guys that go down this path, unfortunately, deal with because the doc's trying to make money. And again, I'm not disparaging physicians. That's why, you, me, guys like us who have to be proactive and take over, there's no possible way, okay, that you can work with a physician that doesn't know what they're doing. Don't come at me with like, well, my benefits, I can't afford this, this is the best doctor I have. It's a $30 copay. Well, then don't do it because you're only going to go down a path that's going to worsen you. I mean, I'm telling you, I've seen this, Richard, thousands of times with guys. They use their local doctor or their family doctor. They beg the guy into giving him a script. He has no idea what he's doing. And then all of a sudden they have a script and literally 3 months later, bro, they have less, their testosterone level is lower than when they started when they were deficient.
Yeah. And we'll talk about all those markers when we hop on a Patreon. But one of the things that I noticed, like I've got a family doctor who, like you said, is pretty much useless in this area. They're kind of a jack of all trades, but masters of nothing. And then I went over to Google and I started looking around, for certain keywords like testosterone replacement therapy, hormone optimization. I found a clinic, wasn't too far away, did a free consult. And he followed your script, basically. Let's get baseline. So we ran full blood work and then we looked at the blood work. And then it was like, after that, it's okay, let's introduce this. Let's up your vitamin D. Let's get you on our lipoic acid to get your insulin level fixed. And then I just kind of went with that for a bit. And they also prescribed DHEA, which is a prescription here in Canada. I know it's over the counter in the States. So I kind of went through that for a bit. And then I started kind of like doing some back end work, like foods that increase estrogen, foods that decrease testosterone. I was looking at all other elements too, like shit that's in the water supply. Like I bought a $500 water filtration system, remove foods out of my system. So I did everything. And then, by the end of it, after a couple of blood draws, then you're like, okay, how are you feeling? are these areas that you'd like to improve on? Do you want to try this? And then you kind of go from there. And we'll get into all those details when we talk to the Patreons. I kind of want to go for about another 10 minutes before we take some Q&A.
Sure.
Is there anything that we've missed so far that guys need to hear or questions that they should be asking of themselves?
No, I mean, just start early and start often. If you're 20 years old watching the show right now and you can afford going to get your blood work, especially if you're in the United States, I mean, you can go to Private ND Labs, discountedlabs.com. There's so many private medical companies. You don't need a doctor's script. You can just literally get your testosterone, get your estrogen levels checked, obviously get your lipids checked. You got to go in fasting. You should definitely always check your HA1BC or your A1BC. I can't even speak right now, but that's your glucose understanding. That's your insulin sensitivity. That's literally the most important marker of your health, because the higher that is, the more likely you are to be inflamed, and inflammation is what leads to degradation, and degradation leads to disease, and disease kills you. So ultimately you want to understand like how insulin sensitive you are to eating carbohydrates. And beyond that, that's it. Just again, be proactive, be serious about this. If you're walking around today on the streets and you have too much you have too high of estrogen body fat deposition, you're estrogen dominant, investigate this, find a physician that can help you, because honestly, man, living estrogen dominant is far worse than dealing with any minor side effects of testosterone optimization therapy, which, by the way, go away. Once a guy gets dialed in on this completely goes away. I haven't had a side effect from testosterone therapy in over 10 years. Okay. And the only reason that I did is because I was changing delivery systems to become the guinea pig that I am, so that I can understand, at the level that I understand this. So my body was my endocrine system was kind of going up and down a little bit as I changed delivery systems. But once you get dialed in on this is simple. There's no fear that should be having here. You're not going to deal with what we haven't talked about, which I, again, completely dispel in the book, is like the nonsense that's been created in the media, the misinformation that, the demonization of this, that there's, it leads to heart issues or prostate issues or, vascular stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of nonsense about testosterone optimization therapy, and all of it is clearly dispelled in my book. There's not a single thing that does not improve health-wise from therapeutic testosterone, again, when it's done effectively and efficiently with a clinician who knows what they're doing. There's nothing that it doesn't improve.
Are all of those myths and lies that are perpetrated in the media and the medical community based on the notion that anabolics are used primarily, well, not used primarily, but are heavily used in bodybuilding? I mean, the dosages that they talk about in this, which is the original Bible, for test SIP, for example, was 400 milligram per week up to 1,000 milligrams per week, right. Which is a very high dosage. I mean, the stuff that they put you on when they script you for TOT, what do they usually script you for?
Yeah, it's a good question. It just depends. I mean, you really, like in our book, we always say, stealing from Tim Ferriss, the minimum effective dosage principle.
Right. Yeah.
You want to start low. We always say start low and go slow. But it just totally depends. Like the highest dosage that you'll see from a therapeutic level of an injectable testosterone is about 200 to 250 milligrams a week. And that's even high. For me, I've literally never deviated more than 150 milligrams a week. I always tell people when I give podcasts, it's probably a little higher than that. It might go up to 170 because different delivery systems and esters break down in the bloodstream differently. And then you just never know. You're using different companies, Upjohn, all these different companies, the way they put it in the solution, in the, with the particulates, some of it is like soybean oil, some of it is ethyl oleate. There's all kinds of stuff in there. So you never really know, but I've never, ever been over 170 milligrams. And I always say I take 150, I inject every other day. So it's usually, for me, it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but it's always 3 injections a week. The reason that you want to inject, and again, this is all really, really strongly laid out in the book, and I'll save this for the Patreons, but, you want to, the more you can inject during a weekly basis, the more you're going to mimic your body's natural testosterone production. So the closer you mimic your body's natural systems, the more homeostatic you're going to stay. You're going to have less of an estrogen spike. You're going to obviously not create any kind of, disunity or, you just go, what's the word, below entropy, but you don't want to have like a spike. You don't want it to be like, oh, boom, I just got this big testosterone injection and then my body has to deal with it. So when you inject very linear, small micro dosages throughout the week, your body will see that as like natural testosterone production. So if your body gets used to that, you're going to stay in line, again, very homeostatic most of your life. And again, it's all depending on a man's life and convenience. I cannot inject every day. I'm too busy. I do too much in the world. I travel a lot. It's not helpful for me to inject every day. My business partner, Jim Brown, he doesn't travel as much as me. He's in Florida, very successful guy. He injects every day. It's like literally his morning ritual, right? So, anybody can choose a delivery system that works best for them, but we say it in the book, every day is optimal or best. More than twice a week is second best. Option 1B. 1C would be every other day. And then like lowest tier, but still great for most. And obviously the number one choice is 2 injections a week.
Got it. I'm going to hop in some questions
Sure.
in just a moment before we switch over to the private broadcast. What do we got here? Got one here from James. He says, best way to re-baseline after thyroid cancer. I'm not sure what that question means. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I don't know like what stage thyroid cancer he had, or like what his progression was, or what's happened if he has like a failed thyroid down, if he's on permanent thyroid medication. But the best way is, again, to work with a clinician, hopefully who's experienced in having somebody that has a degraded or non-functional or not optimally functional thyroid, and just normal, start off testosterone only. It's actually a good question. Let me just answer it. So the best way to do this therapy is testosterone only. So testosterone in isolation, see how the body responds. Okay. Because like really big fat men, which, I always say that because we have such a prevalence of obesity in the culture today, those guys are going to most likely aromatize. And what that means is that aromatization is when testosterone is actually formed into estrogen in the blood. Okay. And aromatase is the actual enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen in the blood. There's 3 forms of estrogen. We don't have to go that esoteric here, but the type for guys that guys need to pay attention to is E2. So that's just kind of the chemical symbol for it. But E2 is what leads to the negative unwanted side effects, and negative unwanted side effects of estrogen are very minimal. There's nothing to be worried about. You shouldn't be fearful of this, but they can become water retention. They can become puffy nipples. Guys get gynecomastia. A lot of that is permanent, and it's not from testosterone, but it can exacerbate it. But gynecomastia is hormonal. It normally happens as a kid, or you have that genetically. I have a whole chapter in the TOT Bible about gynecomastia. Gynecomastia, by the way, is affecting more than 60% of men in the world today. Which is
it already affects them, because if you're obese, you're going to put estrogen in your
exactly.
system. That's how you end up with bitch tits,
exactly. Right? So, but that related, you should only be getting back to the question, and his question is good about thyroid, but again, it applies to everybody. Testosterone in isolation. If you're fat, you probably are going to aromatize. So you most likely are going to have to start really low, have a really smart doctor, and then they might have to give you an aromatase inhibitor medication, which is known as an AI. The most common is Arimidex. And a very, very micro dosage of Arimidex until you get balance between your testosterone and estrogen. The goal, Richard, of testosterone optimization therapy is always twofold. And that is happiness. Do I feel good? Do I feel balanced? And then, of course, balance between testosterone and estrogen. That's it. There's no other goal in testosterone optimization therapy. When you get those 2 things achieved, you're good.
Yeah, and you don't try to eliminate estrogen, because you need that for bone density and other parts of the male body, but you want it optimized to the right levels. There's a really good question here. Guy says, what do you make of the thousands of people that have lawsuits against, I can't pronounce that, AbbVie for androgel causing heart attacks?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So all of the lawsuits are frivolous. First off, the original lawsuit, and again, this is actually very, very well elucidated and discussed in the book. I have like all the research, all the legal proceedings, everything's in the book. Again, totbible.com, guys, can get it on Amazon. And by the way, anyone who watches this show today sends me an email to j@trtrevolution.com. So it's TRT Revolution. I haven't changed the domain, even though my domain's changed. I haven't changed the domain email. I'll send you a PDF copy of the book for free. But just make sure you mentioned in there that you watched Richard's YouTube channel. But no, they're all frivolous. The primary lawsuit that's attached that won is already been repealed at the appeals court level. And now they have all these secondary and tertiary, lawsuits that are attached to that. And so now the system has to go through each and every one, but most of them are going to be turned over. The guy who won was literally 400 pounds, morbidly obese dude who went on androgel, which we know is, as I said on this podcast already, is useless, and had a heart attack. So the testosterone did not cause the heart attack. It's already been ruled that it didn't, but somehow his attorney beat the other attorney. So it's just a game. But none of those things, in my opinion, are going to get to a level where it's going to prevent that company from still, creating androgel and stuff like that. But I mean, they're just frivolous lawsuits. It's just, again, it's another example of attorneys being opportunistic. That's all it is.
Yeah, cool. We're going to switch over in a few minutes. I want to wrap up by doing a couple things. First of all, guys, you need to take ownership for your lives. If you want to become better, you're going to have to pay attention to blood work. You're going to have to ask questions. If you're feeling, a lot of the symptoms that guys face, they don't really talk about it that often. If you've got high estrogen, meaning testosterone is aromatizing towards estrogen in your body, you'll usually start to feel tender nipples. Okay. Yeah. If you're not waking up in the morning with a boner, that's a pretty good sign that your testosterone might need to get checked. If you're not able to focus, you have brain fog, that's a pretty good sign that you might want to check your testosterone. You'll also find too that when you start asking medical professionals for information and ideas about this, they're not that open to it. I mean, most of the medical research in the community, in my experience anyway, has been geared towards treating female diseases that are exclusive towards women. The clinic that I deal with, actually, I've been there, I think, 3 or 4 times in the last, since I started seeing them in November, December. Every single time I've been in there, I haven't seen a single dude. It's all women. So yeah. You're going to have to ask questions. You're going to have to, find the right sort of doctor. I was looking for a doctor that was a male, so they understand male hormones and the sort of stuff that guys go through. So that's really, really important. Some of you guys here in the questions have asked, where do you find Jay and where do you get his book? It's on Amazon. It's Jay Campbell. He did offer a free copy of the book. If you email him, you're going to have to go back to that, or maybe you can just announce it, towards the end. He also has a YouTube channel. Go subscribe to his channel. He does regular content. It's great. It's top shelf quality. He has good interviews. Jay, do you want to sign off just by telling people where they can find you again?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate it. So I'm on YouTube. It's just, it's trtrevolution.com, or I'm sorry, it's trtrevolution, youtube.com/trtrevolution. My main website, I have a lot of them, but my main website is TOT. So it's Testosterone Optimization Therapy Revolution.com. It used to be TRT, but we changed it. And then you can find me. I'm very active on Twitter. It's at TRT Expert. Then again, if you're listening to this and you're watching this and you mentioned that you are a subscriber to Richard's YouTube channel or follow Richard, and you send me an email to jay@trtrevolution.com, I'll be happy to send you a PDF copy of the book.
Cool. We're going to sign off and switch over to a Patreon only live broadcast where we're going to be going through my blood work, some more details and specifics of testosterone replacement therapy, more of the how-to stuff like injection frequency, where to inject, what the best testosterones are, where to buy the illegal stuff, how to find a doctor and things like that. So if you guys are interested in that, we're going to switch over shortly. You should become a patron if you're not already. Those of you that are, we'll see you guys there. And there'll, of course, be the recording available to anybody that signs up and wants to watch it later. So I want to thank you guys for hopping on the broadcast today and checking this out. Hopefully we'll get Jay on again in the future. I've really enjoyed talking to you publicly here, brother.
For sure, man. I appreciate it. And definitely, if you ask me, I'll be there.
Thanks, man.